The restaurant was quiet at first, just the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clinking of glasses. A young waitress moved through the tables with practiced ease, balancing plates and glasses with a grace that came from years of experience. She smiled at the guests, took their orders, and anticipated their needs, all while keeping her mind on the clock. Long hours had made her skilled and efficient, but they had also left her tired, with her body aching in ways that only she truly understood. Her life outside of work was simple. She lived in a small apartment a few blocks from the restaurant, filled with the basic things she needed and a few treasures that reflected her true passion: music. In the corner of her apartment sat a piano that had been there for as long as she could remember, worn from use but still beautiful. Every night, after her long shifts, she would sit at that piano and play. It was her escape, her way of expressing emotions she could never put into words. Her fingers danced over the keys, creating melodies that made her feel alive in a way nothing else could. That night, however, her focus had to remain on the restaurant. The place was hosting a charity dinner for some of the wealthiest people in the city. The tables were covered in white linens, silverware polished until it shone, and flowers arranged so perfectly they almost seemed unreal. Crystal glasses reflected the soft candlelight, and the smell of fine food filled the air. The staff moved quickly to make sure every detail was perfect, knowing that the slightest mistake would be noticed. She carried a tray of drinks across the room, weaving between the elegantly dressed guests. Some smiled warmly at her, some barely looked her way, and a few whispered to each other with a hint of amusement when she passed. She had learned to ignore it. In her world, the opinions of the wealthy mattered little. What mattered was doing her job well and finding moments of peace in the music she loved. The restaurant manager was bustling around, checking that everything was in order. The usual pianist was supposed to provide background music, but he had called in sick at the last minute. The manager muttered under his breath, clearly worried about filling the gap. The young waitress noticed his anxious look, and a small idea began to form in her mind, though she quickly dismissed it. It was impossible, she told herself. Who would listen to a waitress play piano in a room full of people who paid thousands for charity dinners? Still, the thought lingered. As the night progressed, more guests arrived, each one adding to the atmosphere of wealth and expectation. The young waitress moved from table to table, serving food and drink, all the while noticing the subtle ways people carried themselves. Some laughed easily, others were stiff and formal, and a few carried an air of superiority that made her tighten her shoulders. She had seen this before, and she knew how to navigate it, but she also felt a quiet longing for a connection that went beyond polite conversation and tips. Behind the scenes, she watched the grand piano in the corner. It was beautiful, made of dark polished wood, and the keys gleamed under the dim lighting. Her heart ached with a mixture of desire and fear whenever she looked at it. She imagined sitting there, letting the music flow from her fingers, filling the room with something real and honest. But the thought of doing it in front of the wealthy, who might scoff or laugh, kept her from even considering it seriously. The guests were beginning to eat, and the restaurant was alive with the sounds of silverware, murmured conversations, and the occasional laugh. The young waitress moved through it all like a shadow, always present but rarely noticed. She poured wine, refilled plates, and kept an eye on each table, making sure that every guest had what they needed. It was exhausting work, and yet there was a rhythm to it, a flow that she found comforting. It was almost like a dance, each step and turn familiar and precise. During a brief lull, she retreated to the corner to catch her breath. Her hands trembled slightly from carrying heavy trays all evening, and her back ached from standing for so long. She glanced at the piano again and felt a pang of longing. She thought of the nights she had spent alone, playing music that no one else heard, pouring her heart into each note. Music had always been her companion, her way of making sense of the world, and tonight, she felt its absence keenly. The manager approached her, frowning slightly. He spoke quietly, explaining that the pianist would not be able to make it for the evening, and the guests were expecting some form of music. He seemed desperate, and without thinking, she suggested she could play. The words left her mouth before she had a chance to stop them, and immediately she wished she could take them back. She had never performed for anyone outside her small circle of friends. The thought of playing for the wealthy, for strangers who might judge her harshly, was terrifying. The manager looked at her, surprise crossing his face, then hesitated before smiling. He shrugged, almost as if saying it was worth a try. The wealthy guests might be entertained, or they might barely notice. She felt her stomach twist with nerves, but also with a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was an opportunity she could not pass up. She moved toward the piano slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The room seemed to shift around her. Conversations faded into a background hum as all eyes turned toward her. The polished keys of the piano reflected the soft candlelight, and for a moment, she felt a sense of awe and fear all at once. She had played in private countless times, but never like this, never with so much at stake. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that music was her language, her way of communicating what she could not put into words. Slowly, she pressed the first key, then the next, letting the notes flow naturally. The sound filled the room, soft at first, then growing in confidence. She felt herself relax into the music, her nerves giving way to the familiar rhythm that had always comforted her. Some guests paused mid-conversation, surprised by the unexpected performance. Their initial curiosity turned into attention, and the room seemed to quiet as the young waitress played. She poured her heart into the music, every note carrying a piece of her story, every chord expressing what words could not. The wealthy, who often seemed untouchable, were suddenly humanized by the beauty of the performance. They leaned forward, listened intently, and in some cases, closed their eyes, letting the music reach them. In that moment, she was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, sharing something real and precious with the world. Her past struggles, the long hours of work, the dreams that had seemed so distant, all found expression in her playing. She felt a connection with the audience that transcended social status, a shared understanding that came from the universal language of music. As the final notes lingered in the air, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, slowly, applause began to build, soft at first, then growing louder until it filled the entire space. The young waitress looked up, surprised and a little overwhelmed by the reaction. She had not expected such a response, and it left her breathless, not from fear but from the sheer intensity of the moment. The manager appeared at her side, smiling proudly, while some of the guests approached to offer congratulations. They spoke of their admiration, their appreciation, and in some cases, their astonishment at discovering such talent in someone they had previously overlooked. She accepted their words with gratitude, feeling a sense of validation that she had never experienced before. For the first time, her passion for music had been seen and acknowledged in a way that mattered. Later, when the night had wound down and the guests had left, she returned to the piano, sitting alone in the quiet restaurant. She reflected on what had just happened, realizing that taking the risk had changed everything. The fear that had once held her back was replaced by a sense of possibility, a belief that her talent could take her beyond the boundaries she had once thought were insurmountable. Music had given her a voice, and tonight the world had finally listened. The young waitress left the restaurant that night with a lighter step and a full heart. She walked through the city streets, the cool night air brushing against her face, and thought about the future with a sense of hope she had not felt before. She knew there would be challenges ahead, and that life would not suddenly become easy, but she also knew that she had discovered a strength within herself that could carry her through anything. The piano, the music, and the courage to share her gift had transformed an ordinary night into one she would never forget. The next evening at the restaurant began like any other, with the staff moving quickly to prepare for the busy night ahead. The young waitress had returned, still riding the quiet excitement of the previous night's unexpected performance. Though she tried to focus on her regular duties, her mind kept drifting back to the piano and the applause that had filled the room. She had played for an audience that normally never noticed her, and for the first time she felt her music mattered. The manager approached her early in the shift with a hesitant look. He explained that the pianist for the week had again called in sick, and the charity dinner planned for the evening needed some form of music. He glanced at her as if weighing the possibility, and then asked quietly if she would consider playing again. The young waitress felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. She knew the last night had been a rare stroke of luck, but now it felt like a real opportunity to show what she could do. She agreed, her heart fluttering with anticipation. As the dinner began, she went about her usual tasks, taking orders, serving drinks, and checking in on guests. The atmosphere was formal and elegant, but there was a subtle warmth in the air, a sense of expectation she could almost feel. She found herself stealing glances at the piano in the corner, imagining how it would feel to sit there again and let the music flow from her fingers. Her confidence had grown slightly from the previous night, yet a small knot of nerves remained. The guests arrived in larger numbers this evening, some familiar from the previous night, some entirely new. The wealthy crowd brought with them the usual mix of polished manners and unspoken judgments. She moved among them gracefully, recognizing that this night would be different. As she approached a table to serve wine, a woman leaned in and asked if she had played the piano the night before. The waitress nodded shyly, feeling a quiet pride. The woman smiled and told her that she had left a strong impression, that it was rare to hear such emotion and skill from someone so young and unassuming. The young waitress returned to the piano, feeling a strange combination of fear and excitement. She sat down, hands hovering above the keys, and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She took a deep breath and began to play, starting softly, letting the music ease into the room like a gentle tide. The notes flowed naturally, with the experience of countless nights spent practicing alone at home guiding her fingers. The room slowly quieted as guests turned to listen. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise, expecting little from a waitress, but were quickly captivated by the sound. The young waitress found herself lost in the music, her nerves fading as she played. Each note carried her emotions, her struggles, and her dreams, and the room responded in kind. There was a gentle hush over the tables, a collective attention that made the young waitress feel as if time itself had paused. One guest, a man who often appeared critical of everything, leaned forward, his expression softening. He whispered to his companion, clearly impressed by the depth and skill of the performance. Another couple smiled at each other, nodding in appreciation. The young waitress felt a quiet thrill at the realization that her music could touch people in ways words never could. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an artist, creating an experience that transcended the formal setting of the dinner. As the evening progressed, the music shifted. She moved from gentle melodies to more complex pieces, allowing her fingers to dance across the keys with confidence. The piano sang under her touch, carrying stories of hope, longing, and quiet triumph. The guests remained absorbed, some swaying subtly to the rhythm, others closing their eyes to better absorb the sound. It was a rare moment of unity, where social differences faded and everyone in the room was simply human, sharing in the beauty of music. During a brief pause, the young waitress looked up and saw the manager watching her with a proud smile. He had always appreciated her dedication, but tonight he saw her in a new light, as someone who could inspire and connect through talent and courage. He gestured subtly, encouraging her to continue, and she nodded, grateful for the support. She began a new piece, one she had composed herself in quiet moments at home. The melody was soft at first, almost fragile, then gradually grew stronger and more confident. She felt every emotion she had bottled up over the years pour into the music, and the room responded in kind. Guests shifted in their seats, some leaning closer, others wiping a small tear from the corner of an eye. It was a moment of profound connection, the kind she had always dreamed of sharing with the world. One elderly man, sitting near the back, seemed particularly moved. He held his hands together as if in prayer, listening intently. She noticed him but did not let it distract her, knowing that the music needed to flow uninterrupted. When the piece ended, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone were savoring the final note. Then, applause broke out, spontaneous and warm, filling the room with a sense of joy and wonder. The young waitress rose from the piano, slightly trembling but smiling. The manager came over, clapping softly, and whispered words of encouragement. Several guests approached her, expressing genuine admiration and surprise at the talent they had just witnessed. Some asked about her training, others encouraged her to perform again in the future. Each compliment bolstered her confidence, reinforcing the belief that her music had real value. After the dinner ended and the guests had departed, the young waitress stayed behind to tidy up and reflect on the night. She thought about the power of courage, the importance of seizing opportunities even when they seemed daunting. Playing the piano had always been a personal escape, a private joy, but tonight she had discovered that it could also be a bridge, connecting her to people she might never have interacted with otherwise. She left the restaurant later than usual, walking through quiet streets with a sense of lightness in her step. The night air was cool and refreshing, carrying away the exhaustion of the day. She thought about the piano waiting for her at home, the compositions she wanted to create, and the possibility that her music could reach even further than she had imagined. The applause and recognition of the guests lingered in her mind, a reminder that talent and courage could open doors that fear had once kept closed. That night, she played at home again, not for an audience, but for herself. She experimented with new melodies, letting her emotions guide her fingers across the keys. Each note was infused with the memory of the evening, the faces of the guests, and the sense of connection that music had created. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to continue pursuing her passion despite the challenges that lay ahead. As she played, she realized that her life was changing. The path would not be easy, and there would be moments of doubt and fear, but she had discovered something essential about herself: the ability to share her gift, to touch others through her art, and to step beyond the limits she had once placed on herself. The young waitress knew that this was only the beginning, and that the piano, her music, and her courage would continue to guide her toward new and exciting opportunities. The next morning, she returned to work with a quiet confidence, knowing that the world had shifted slightly for her. She greeted the guests with a genuine smile, served their meals with practiced ease, and moved through the restaurant with the calm assurance of someone who had discovered a new sense of self. The memory of her performance, and the impact it had on the guests, stayed with her throughout the day, a source of strength and inspiration. By the end of the week, the story of her performance had begun to spread among the staff and some of the regular patrons. People who had previously overlooked her now saw her in a new light, as someone capable of extraordinary talent and courage. She remained humble, focusing on her work and her music, but she could not deny the quiet thrill that came from knowing she had made a real impression. The young waitress had taken a step into a world she had once thought beyond reach, and she was ready to continue walking that path, one note at a time. The restaurant was bustling again, filled with the soft glow of chandeliers and the muted hum of conversation. Tonight, the young waitress moved with a quiet confidence, her experience from the previous nights giving her a calm center amidst the busy service. She carried trays of food and glasses of wine, greeting familiar faces and accommodating new guests with gentle efficiency. But her thoughts kept returning to the piano, which stood in the corner like a silent witness to all the energy and elegance surrounding it. Word had spread among the staff and some returning guests about her performances, though most of the wealthy patrons attending tonight had not yet seen her play. The manager had once again suggested she take the piano if the opportunity arose, and this time she did not hesitate. She felt ready, more prepared than ever to share her music and to step fully into the role she had discovered for herself. As she approached the grand piano, the polished wood gleaming under the warm lights, she felt her fingers itch to touch the keys. The room was filled with conversation and laughter when she began. At first, the music started softly, almost shyly, as she let her hands reacquaint themselves with the keys. But as the notes filled the room, the chatter quieted. The guests, dressed in elegant evening attire, turned their attention toward her, curiosity sparking in their eyes. There was a brief moment of tension, a collective pause as everyone waited to see what would unfold from the hands of the young waitress. She closed her eyes and let the music flow naturally. Her fingers moved with purpose, dancing across the keys, each note carefully chosen, yet carried by instinct. She had spent years playing in solitude, allowing her emotions to guide her. And now those years of practice merged with the present moment, creating something larger than herself. The music was a story, unfolding in real time, carrying her hopes, her struggles, and her joy to the audience. Some guests were taken aback at first. It was not often that someone of her position performed for such an audience, and the surprise on their faces soon gave way to admiration. Their reactions were subtle at first. A shift in posture, a soft intake of breath, a quiet smile, but gradually, the atmosphere transformed. The music had created a space where social distinctions faded, where the wealthy could simply listen and feel, rather than observe from a distance. She continued with a gentle piece, its melody flowing like water. The piano responded to every nuance of her touch, amplifying the emotions she poured into it. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others leaned in, captivated by the unexpected depth of feeling. A few whispered to one another, amazed that a waitress could command such presence and skill. The young waitress played on, her confidence growing as she saw the audience respond with genuine engagement. The restaurant, usually a place of hurried service and polite conversation, had become a hall of quiet contemplation. The aroma of fine food mingled with the music, creating an atmosphere that was almost magical. The guests were no longer simply diners. They were witnesses, participants in an experience that transcended the usual formalities. She felt the connection with the audience, sensing their reactions, and allowing them to guide her performance just as she guided the music. At one table, a man who often appeared stern and reserved was leaning forward, clearly moved by the performance. He whispered to his companion, and a smile briefly softened his expression. Elsewhere, a woman dabbed at her eyes, moved by a passage that carried an unusual tenderness. The young waitress was aware of these responses but did not let them distract her. She had learned to focus, to let the music speak, knowing that each note could reach someone in a way words never could. As the evening progressed, she shifted into more complex and challenging pieces. Her fingers moved with greater speed and precision. Her confidence mirrored in the room as the guests followed the melodies with rapt attention. The music ebbed and flowed, alternating between moments of delicate vulnerability and passages of bold strength. Each phrase was infused with her personal story, the life she had lived in quiet dedication to her craft, the moments of solitude, and the hours spent dreaming of such nights. The young waitress glanced occasionally at the manager, who watched with a proud, knowing smile. He had seen her potential from the beginning, but tonight, she was displaying it fully, and the transformation was evident. The audience, too, was transformed, captivated not just by skill but by the emotion that resonated from every key she touched. The music was no longer background. It was the central experience, commanding attention and admiration. Midway through the performance, she moved to an original composition she had created late at night in her apartment. The melody was personal, a reflection of her journey, her aspirations, and her quiet resilience. The room responded immediately, the guests leaning in, listening intently. She felt the music take on a life of its own, as though the piano had become a vessel for all the emotions she could not express otherwise. In that moment, she was both vulnerable and powerful, sharing a piece of herself in a way that words could never achieve. The crescendo of the piece drew gasps and soft murmurs of appreciation from the audience. The notes hung in the air, shimmering, before fading into a gentle conclusion. A pause followed, a moment of stillness in which the entire room seemed to catch its breath. Then, slowly, the applause began. At first, it was tentative, polite, but it quickly grew into something more enthusiastic and heartfelt. The young waitress rose from the piano, slightly trembling, but with a radiant smile. Several guests approached her immediately, offering compliments and expressions of wonder. Some asked about her training, others inquired whether she had considered performing professionally. She accepted their words with humility, Yet a quiet sense of pride blossomed within her. She realized that her music had made a real impact, that she had connected with people in a way that went beyond social barriers or expectations. For the first time, she felt that her talent and her courage had opened doors to a world she had only imagined. After the evening concluded and the guests had departed, she remained in the restaurant for a while, sitting at the piano alone. She reflected on what had happened, on the journey that had brought her to this point. Playing for an audience had been daunting, yet it had also been exhilarating and fulfilling in a way nothing else could match. She understood now that music was not just her passion. It was her gift, her bridge to the world, and the way she could leave a lasting mark on those who listened. Walking home through quiet city streets, she felt a sense of renewal. The night had confirmed something she had always suspected but never fully embraced. Her music had the power to move people, to touch hearts, and to create moments of shared humanity. She thought about her piano at home, about the melodies yet to be composed, and about the opportunities that lay ahead if she continued to trust her instincts and courage. When she returned home, she played again, letting the music guide her through emotions both familiar and new. Each note was a reflection of her journey. The nights spent practicing alone, the moments of doubt, and the growing awareness that she could face the world with her talent as her companion. The piano, once a private confidant, now felt like a partner in a journey that had just begun. The young waitress knew that life would not suddenly become easy, that there would be challenges and setbacks. But she also knew that her courage to step forward, to take risks, and to share her gift had set her on a path towards something extraordinary. Each performance, each connection with an audience, reinforced the belief that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She had discovered a part of herself that could inspire, touch, and transform. The days that followed were filled with a quiet excitement. The story of her performance began circulating more widely, both among the restaurant staff and in social circles connected to the charity events. Some guests returned to experience her music again, eager to see her perform live. Invitations and opportunities, small at first but promising, began to appear. She embraced each one carefully, aware that her journey was just beginning, and that every choice she made would shape her future. Despite the growing attention, she remained grounded. She continued her work at the restaurant, serving meals and interacting with guests, but now with a sense of purpose and pride that had been absent before. The piano became a symbol not just of her talent, but of her courage, her dedication, and the limitless possibilities that awaited if she dared to continue pursuing her passion. Each note she played was a step forward, a message to herself and to the world that she was ready for whatever came next. That night, as she prepared for sleep, she thought about the journey ahead. The road would not be without obstacles, but the music had shown her a new way to navigate the world. She had faced her fears, embraced her gift, and shared it with people who had once seemed distant and unapproachable. She understood now that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a companion, a guide, and a bridge to the dreams she had long held close to her heart. The young waitress fell asleep with a sense of quiet determination, ready for the next chapter in her journey. The restaurant was alive with movement and conversation, but the young waitress felt a calm focus that she had never experienced before. She moved gracefully among the guests, carrying trays, taking orders, and ensuring that every detail was attended to. Yet all the while, her mind returned to the piano in the corner. Tonight felt different. The music she was about to play would not just be background. It would become the heart of the evening. The guests were arriving in waves, dressed in fine clothing, their faces a mix of curiosity and expectation. Some had heard of her previous performances, while others were entirely unaware of what was about to unfold. The manager approached her quietly, nodding toward the piano and giving her an encouraging smile. There was no need for words. She knew what she had to do. She walked to the piano, her hands slightly trembling with anticipation. The polished keys glimmered under the soft light, and for a moment, she paused, letting the quiet of the room settle around her. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost hesitant, but they carried a warmth and sincerity that immediately caught the attention of the guests. Conversations dwindled as eyes turned toward her, and the restaurant seemed to grow still, as if holding its breath. As she continued, her confidence grew. The music flowed naturally, a reflection of her emotions and her years of practice. Each note carried a story, each chord a message she could not convey with words. The guests, initially surprised that a waitress could play with such skill, began to lean in, captivated by the melodies that filled the room. Their expressions softened, their eyes attentive, and their minds engaged in the shared experience of the performance. The young waitress moved seamlessly from one piece to another, her fingers dancing over the keys with precision and passion. The music rose and fell like a living thing, drawing the audience into its rhythm. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others followed the motion of her hands, amazed at the dexterity and grace she displayed. It was no longer a simple performance. It was an encounter with beauty, emotion, and artistry that transcended social boundaries. As the evening progressed, she played a series of pieces that challenged her skills, each one more demanding than the last. She relished the opportunity, feeling the thrill of creating something powerful and moving in real time. The wealthy guests, who had once been reserved and formal, now found themselves drawn into the music, responding instinctively to its rhythm and emotion. Some tapped their fingers lightly on the table, others nodded in quiet appreciation, and a few let small smiles spread across their faces, caught up in the joy and wonder of the moment. In a particularly emotional passage, she played a piece that spoke of longing and hope. The notes were soft and tender, carrying a vulnerability that touched the hearts of the listeners. One woman dabbed at her eyes discreetly, moved by the unexpected depth of feeling. A man at another table leaned forward, his expression softened as if he had been transported away from the formal surroundings into a private world of music and emotion. The young waitress played on, letting the piano tell the story that her voice could not. There were moments of quiet intensity when the music seemed to suspend time itself. The restaurant, usually a place of brisk service and polite chatter, had become a sanctuary where people could simply feel. She felt their attention as a tangible presence, guiding her performance, and in turn, she guided them through a journey of sound and emotion. Each piece flowed into the next, the transitions smooth and deliberate, creating a narrative that captivated everyone in the room. Some of the wealthier guests who had initially been skeptical found themselves caught off guard. They had expected polite background music at best, but now they were witnessing a level of skill and emotional depth that was rare and remarkable. The young waitress could sense their astonishment, but she did not let it affect her. She focused on the music, letting it lead, and allowed the audience to experience it fully without distraction. The crescendo of the evening came when she played an original composition, one she had written in the quiet of her apartment over many nights. The melody was intricate and heartfelt, reflecting both her journey and the emotions she had experienced along the way. The room was silent except for the piano, every ear and eye attentive, every person drawn into the story she was telling. The piece rose to a powerful climax, each note ringing clearly, the music filling every corner of the space. The guests were mesmerized. Some held their breath, captivated by the raw emotion and skill on display. Others sat forward in their chairs, completely absorbed, as if the music had transported them to another place. There was a shared energy in the room, a connection between the performer and her audience that transcended social status or wealth. In that moment, she was not just a waitress or a performer. She was a conduit for something profound, something that resonated deeply with everyone present. As the final notes faded, there was a heartbeat of silence, a collective pause in which the audience seemed to linger on the beauty they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, soft at first, then growing into a strong, enthusiastic ovation. The young waitress looked up, slightly trembling, and saw the faces of the guests, their expressions full of admiration and awe. The manager approached, smiling proudly, and the room erupted in genuine applause that lasted longer than she had ever imagined. Several guests came forward, offering words of praise and astonishment. They spoke of her skill, her courage, and the emotional power of her performance. Some asked if she had considered performing professionally. Others encouraged her to continue sharing her music whenever possible. The young waitress accepted their words with humility, but inside, she felt a quiet surge of pride and affirmation. She had risked stepping forward, and it had been met with overwhelming appreciation. Later, when the restaurant had emptied and the lights dimmed, she sat alone at the piano, reflecting on the evening. She thought about how far she had come, from practicing alone in her apartment to captivating an audience of wealthy patrons. The music had connected her to people in a way she had never experienced before. It had broken barriers, erased social distinctions, and created a shared moment of beauty and emotion. She understood now that her talent and courage had real power. Walking home that night, she felt a sense of lightness and purpose. The city streets were quiet, the cool air refreshing, and she thought about the possibilities that lay ahead. The applause, the admiration, and the shared experience of the performance were reminders that she could achieve more than she had ever imagined. Her music was her voice, her bridge to the world, and her way of making a meaningful impact. Back at her apartment, she played again, letting the melodies flow freely, experimenting with new ideas, and exploring emotions she had yet to express. Each note carried the memory of the evening, the reactions of the audience, and the knowledge that her gift could touch people in profound ways. She felt a renewed determination to continue pursuing her passion, knowing that her music had the potential to inspire and move others. The days that followed brought a quiet excitement. The story of her performance spread among regular guests and staff alike, and some of the wealthy patrons mentioned it to their acquaintances. She remained humble, focused on her work and her practice, but she could not ignore the growing recognition. Invitations to perform in small events began to appear. Opportunities that had once seemed impossible now felt attainable. Each experience reinforced her confidence and her belief in the value of sharing her gift. The young waitress continued her daily routine at the restaurant, serving meals and interacting with guests, but now with a sense of pride and purpose that had been absent before. She approached her work with a new energy, knowing that her music was not just a personal passion but a bridge to the world, capable of connecting with people in ways that nothing else could. The piano had become a symbol of her courage, her talent, and her potential. As the week progressed, she reflected on the lessons of the evening. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it. Sharing her music had been daunting, but it had also been transformative. She had discovered a part of herself that could inspire, captivate, and touch hearts. The wealthy patrons who had once seemed distant now saw her not just as a waitress, but as a musician, an artist, and a storyteller through her piano. That night, she played once more at home, allowing her fingers to explore new melodies and emotions. She felt a sense of fulfillment and anticipation, knowing that her journey had only just begun. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a companion, a guide, and a pathway to her dreams. The young waitress understood that her performances were not just for others, but for herself as well, affirming her identity, her passion, and her purpose. She fell asleep that night with a heart full of hope and determination, ready for whatever came next. The night had begun like any other, with the restaurant full of anticipation and quiet murmurs of the guests. Yet tonight felt different to the young waitress. She moved among the tables with a quiet focus, serving with grace, and her mind often returned to the piano in the corner. This would be her final performance in a series that had changed her life, and she could feel the weight of the moment resting lightly on her shoulders. It was not fear that gripped her, but a sense of purpose, a desire to pour all she had into the music one last time for this particular evening. As the guests arrived, some familiar, some new, they carried a mix of curiosity and expectation. Many had heard about her previous performances, and a few were eager to see for themselves what had created such a stir. She smiled as she passed, polite yet inwardly excited. The restaurant manager approached briefly, giving a subtle nod and a quiet, encouraging smile. It was enough to remind her that she had done this before and could do it again, and she felt a calm determination as she walked toward the piano. Her hands hovered over the polished keys for a brief moment, the reflections of the chandeliers dancing across the surface. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath, and began with a soft melody, letting the notes slowly weave into the room. The guests' chatter softened, replaced by the gentle hum of music that filled every corner. The opening notes were delicate yet purposeful, carrying the sincerity of someone who had found her voice in a place where few expected it. The young waitress played with a quiet confidence that had been growing steadily over the past performances. Each note was deliberate, each chord a reflection of her emotions and experiences. The room, previously filled with polite conversations and the clinking of glasses, now held a shared attention. Guests leaned in, listening intently, their expressions softening as the music enveloped them. The atmosphere shifted from formal dining to a shared human experience, and the young waitress felt the connection with each listener as if they were traveling the journey with her. As she moved through a series of pieces, she allowed herself to be guided by the emotions that surfaced with each note. Some pieces were tender and reflective, filled with the gentle melancholy of longing and the warmth of hope. Others were bold and confident, showcasing the skill she had honed through years of quiet practice. Each transition was seamless, and the music carried the guests from one feeling to another, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and moving. The young waitress noticed subtle changes in the audience. Faces that had initially held polite curiosity now reflected genuine engagement. A woman quietly dabbed at her eyes, moved by a particularly tender passage. A man leaned forward, captivated by the fluidity and expression of the performance. Some guests whispered softly to each other, astonished at the depth and power emanating from someone who had once been considered just part of the restaurant staff. The young waitress, though aware of their reactions, remained focused on the music, letting it guide her and trusting that it would carry the story she wanted to tell. Midway through her set, she played an original composition she had written in the quiet of her apartment. The piece was intimate, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her growth. The melody was intricate and flowing, weaving together moments of quiet reflection and rising intensity. As she played, she felt the music becoming something larger than herself, a living thing that connected everyone in the room. The wealthy patrons, some reserved and skeptical, were completely absorbed, responding to the music with subtle gestures, soft smiles, and attentive listening. She reached the crescendo of the piece, a powerful section that showcased both technical skill and emotional depth. The notes rang clearly, resonating through the space, and the audience seemed suspended in time, held captive by the beauty and intensity of the performance. The young waitress felt a surge of exhilaration, a thrill that came from fully expressing herself and seeing it reflected in the reactions of those listening. The connection was immediate and profound, a reminder that music could transcend social boundaries and speak directly to the heart. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. The audience lingered in that quiet, as if savoring the end of something beautiful. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room, soft at first, then growing louder and more enthusiastic. The young waitress looked up, slightly trembling but smiling, and saw the faces of the guests, their expressions full of admiration and gratitude. She had captivated them not only with her skill but with the honesty and emotion that had guided every note. Several guests approached her, offering words of praise and encouragement. They spoke of the depth of her performance, her courage, and the remarkable talent they had discovered in someone they had once overlooked. Some asked about her musical background, while others suggested she consider performing professionally. The young waitress accepted their compliments with humility, feeling a quiet pride that came from knowing she had taken a risk and succeeded. Her music had touched hearts, and that validation carried a warmth that lingered long after the applause had ended. After the dinner, as the restaurant emptied, she returned to the piano alone. The room was quiet except for the faint echo of her last performance. She sat there, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Music had always been her refuge, her companion in solitude, and now it had become her bridge to the world. She realized that courage, talent, and persistence could create opportunities where none seemed possible. Walking home that night, the young waitress felt a sense of fulfillment and anticipation. The streets were quiet, the cool night air brushing against her face, and she thought about the future. She knew the path ahead would not be without challenges, but she also understood that she had discovered something essential about herself: the ability to share her gift, to inspire and move people, and to step beyond the limitations she had once imagined. The applause, the recognition, and the admiration she had received were proof that her music had value and purpose. Once home, she sat at her own piano and played again, not for an audience but for herself. The melodies were fluid and free, carrying the experiences of the night and the emotions that had emerged from performing. She experimented with new compositions, letting her feelings guide her hands across the keys. Each note was a reminder of her journey, the challenges she had faced, and the courage it had taken to share her talent with the world. In the days that followed, she continued to work at the restaurant, serving meals and interacting with guests, but she carried a quiet confidence that had been absent before. The story of her performance began to spread further, not only among the staff and regular patrons but also in social circles connected to the charity events. People who had once overlooked her now saw her in a new light, recognizing the talent and courage that had always existed but had rarely been revealed. She began to receive invitations to perform at smaller events and gatherings, opportunities that allowed her to share her music with a broader audience. Each performance reinforced the lessons she had learned: that courage could overcome fear, that talent could break through social boundaries, and that sharing her gift could inspire and connect people in meaningful ways. The young waitress embraced each opportunity with gratitude, aware that every step forward was part of a journey that was uniquely her own. Through it all, she remained humble, focusing on her music and the joy it brought to herself and others. She continued to practice diligently, exploring new melodies, techniques, and compositions. The piano became more than an instrument. It was a companion, a guide, and a symbol of the possibilities that awaited when she trusted in her own abilities. Each note played was a testament to the courage it had taken to step forward and the strength she had discovered within herself. Reflecting on the journey, she realized that the performances had changed her in profound ways. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace her talent, and to share it without fear of judgment. She had discovered that music could create connections that transcended wealth, status, and expectations. It was a powerful reminder that talent, when combined with courage and dedication, could open doors and transform lives. As she prepared for bed that night, she felt a deep sense of contentment and anticipation. The journey had not ended. It was only beginning. She knew there would be challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty ahead, but she also knew that her music, her courage, and her dedication would guide her through. The young waitress closed her eyes, her heart full of hope, knowing that she had taken the first steps on a path that could lead to extraordinary possibilities. She fell asleep with a sense of peace and determination, ready for the next chapter in her life, confident that her talent and courage would continue to shape her future and touch the lives of others.